Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name's Brandon Clements, and I'm so excited to be here on behalf of School of Motion to teach you guys how we're going to create production-ready rigs and animation inside of Unreal Engine. You're not going to want to miss this one. So this video is going to cover a lot of different topics, and I'm going to do my best to cover each and every one for you guys. We also have all the scene files available in the description below, so definitely check everything out there and download and follow along. I think it will help you guys kind of understand the concepts a little bit better. But we're going to start in Blender. I'm going to show you how to get all of your static meshes into Unreal Engine. Then we're going to use a tool inside of Unreal Engine called Skeletal Mesh Editor to turn a static mesh into a skeletal mesh. And then we're going to use one of my favorite tools in Unreal Engine. It's super cool, and I think you guys will agree. It's called Control Rig. And what that will allow us to do is add controls on top of our bones to animate within Sequencer in Unreal Engine. And then finally, we'll wrap up by taking all of that and making an animation sequence that we can reuse in our project. So let's go ahead and dive in. This part is not at all important to the tutorial or to rigging. You can actually just skip this part if you're not interested in how these assets were made and how I put them together, but I just wanted to give as much transparency as possible of how I created the assets and how they're brought into Unreal Engine. So to start off, here on the left, we have a caustic pattern that dances and loops, and this is just made with procedural Voronoi texture, and this has been exported as an image sequence and imported into Unreal Engine to use as a light function to create this cool caustic pattern that you may see on the bottom of a pool or ocean floor. And these objects were all created in Blender. I modeled everything in here, and then I used the procedural texturing tools and node graph inside of Blender and baked all of those down into images so that they come over very cleanly to Unreal Engine. So this is very important to unwrap your UVs, bake your textures, and Unreal will accept those very, very well. And I want to show you the chest really quick. Has been separated into two different pieces so that it's easy for us to add the weights and influences to these parts to make them move correctly inside of Unreal Engine. Okay, and now let's move over to this example. This isn't used in the tutorial at all, but I'm just going to use it as a visual representation to teach you a little bit more about rigging if you're not familiar with rigging, or maybe this is the first time you've heard that term. What rigging is, it's basically a way to add bones to a character. So if I show you in wireframe, this character has bones, and these bones influence all the little vertices on this character. So when we would actually move the arm, it would move the upper arm, lower arm, so on and so forth. But animators don't really want to grab the bones inside of the mesh where they live and where they correspond, because they have to actually rotate the vertices from a certain pivot point. That can be really messy, and it's very technical for animators to look at something like this. So what we do is create iconic representations or control points on the character that is more forgiving for artists to recognize instantly that, oh, this is going to be the head control, and I can use this to add keyframes to manipulate the character and animate them. So that's really the quick explanation of rigging coming from me. Now, this is great that we can create these rigs inside of Blender, but what if we need to get this inside of the game engine, or we need to add small tweaks to the animation inside of Unreal, or the client needs another animation authored? Sometimes that's really hard to do inside of the DCC, and then you have to export that back into the game engine and make sure everything lines up correctly. So how do we get the asset into Unreal Engine? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do this, and I like to rely on a script from Blue Raven. If I scroll to the top of the script, it says Blender for Unreal Engine by Xavier. Blue Raven is what he goes by. And this is a free script, and there will be a link in the description below on how to get this script, but definitely leave him some cash, because this script is really amazing. You can kind of export everything in bulk. You can export sequencer stuff, so like camera animations and things like that, and it comes over very, very nice. What I'm going to show you is one of my favorite things to do. I like to be modular in my approach, so I like to export things that I can have control over and then update them later if they need to be. So I'm going to grab the chest, and set the export type to export recursive, which will grab all the children or dependencies and export that as well. So some cool automation. And then under object advanced properties, you may or may not want to move this object to the center before you export. So for instance, this is already at the center at 0, 0, 0, but for instance, these objects, I may not want to have them at the center of the scene. So that way, when I drag them into Unreal Engine's viewport, they already are placed in the correct spot. Okay, so we'll go ahead and leave that on for the chest. We'll scroll down a little bit further to our exports rollout, and we have different filters and nomenclatures that we can use. So you can edit this, but I like everything exactly how it is. It's really, really handy and very nice. Then you can say export selected on this selection filter and click show assets. So it says chest static mesh, one asset will be exported. So this is perfect. You can click this button to check for potential errors and go ahead and fix them. So a lot of sanity checking here, which is great to have when you're working in a large team or a large project. But what I'll do is just go ahead and click export for Unreal Engine, and that will create a file on disk at the Blender location. And it says export of one asset has been done. So I'll copy the import script, which is very important. And then we'll come back to Unreal Engine. And at the very bottom, we'll paste in this console command and then hit enter. And it already knows in our project that there is something called SM_chess. So it went ahead and this red check lets me know that this has been updated. And if you're unfamiliar or you don't see this in your project, the red check is coming from source control. So I have everything on GitHub. And what source control is a way to monitor and track all of your changes throughout time, so that if you did accidentally update something that broke the game, you can actually revert the changes. So it's basically just a list. It's very handy to do. I definitely highly recommend you check it out if you're using Unreal Engine. Okay, so let's move forward and check out what our project looks like inside of the engine. I'll jump into our camera cut track and zoom this out a little bit. I am in the motion design mode right now in this module. I'm going to switch this over to animation mode in a second. So just know that Unreal Engine has different modules you can switch between. That kind of changes the interface and presents you with new tools. So we've got a lot of my process covered and a lot of background information to get you up to speed. Let's go ahead and make sure that your plugins are enabled, and we need to go to plugins and let's search for motion design. I like the motion design module because it's very reminiscent of things like Cinema 4D. And once you enable this, you will have to restart your engine, and then you will get a drop-down selection for motion design. So again, you can jump into different modules inside of Unreal Engine for different tasks. So it just makes your UI a little bit easier. What we're going to do is enable TRS. So we're going to enable the gizmo. And this is experimental, but this is what gives me the, you want to check both of these, by the way, but this is what gives me this new looking gizmo. You may have noticed that this is a little bit different, and this is more reminiscent of Maya. So you can actually select the gizmo and it will turn gold, and then you can use the middle mouse button in the viewport to actually move it on that axis. And I like having that flexibility in the editor. So go ahead and turn that on. And then we also need to enable a few more things. So we need the skeletal mesh editor tools. So skeletal mesh editing, there we go. Skeletal mesh editing tools. Go ahead and turn that on as well. And then we can enable control rig, have that turned on. And then once everything restarts, you'll be back up to speed with me. And we're ready to dive in and start looking at the mesh that we imported. So this static mesh, and what a static mesh really is, it's what it sounds like. It's a very static thing in your scene, and you can only animate in Sequencer the transform of this. So you can only animate the location, scale, and rotation. So you can't actually open the lid. So that's what this is going to be about, is giving us more controls with this skeletal mesh editor and adding bones. So we need to right click on this asset and convert it to a skeletal mesh. And then I'm going to go ahead and chuck it into another folder called SKM2 just for this tutorial series. This is just another folder for skeletal meshes in my project. Okay, and once that happens, we are greeted with two new assets. We get the skeletal or sorry, the skeleton, I should say. And then we have the skeletal mesh. So this is very indicative to Unreal Engine. We have the, what is just the skeleton, which is just the bone. And then we have the renderable mesh itself. Okay, so when you drag this into your scene, you would use the skeletal mesh, and you can reuse skeletons inside of Unreal Engine. That's another topic for another day, but it's very cool stuff. Okay, so once we have the skeletal mesh open, notated by the pink icon, we're going to go into editing tools, and then we're going to jump into edit skeleton by this little skeleton guy, and we're going to add by a component. So this is pretty neat. I like to do it this way by selecting faces. I'm going to hold shift and left click, to select those two triangles, and I'm going to select those two triangles there. And with those components selected, I can actually add or create another bone. So now we have root, and then we have something called joint. This is our new bone that we've created. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create one more bone for us. So again, let's select these triangles. Okay. And then click create. And now we have this tree. We kind of have this same parent-child structure that you saw with the character in Blender, but we have it all within Unreal Engine, and we can manipulate and edit, and man, this stuff is so cool. So let's go ahead and take the first joint, and we're going to drag and drop that into the root. And I'm going to call this first joint. I'm going to use a nomenclature called JNT for joint _ chest. And then I'm going to take this other joint, which is this guy up here, which is the hinge, and I'm going to put that under the root as well. Okay, so make sure your tree looks like this, and I'm going to call this JNT hinge. Now, the reason I've done this is because we're going to weight the bottom section. Remember how I showed you this is 2 halves? We're going to weight that to chest, and then the top half will be hinge, and then the root will actually just drive and influence the other 2 joints just from the parent-child relationship in this tree. So pretty cool that we can do this inside of Unreal Engine. I need to do one more thing, and that's I'm going to reset the rotation to the world on the joint for the chest, and then you can see that the joint hinge is already reset to the world, so that's perfect. And let's go ahead and accept that. Now, all we've done is just created bones, and they are not weighted to anything. You can see if I move them, nothing's happening because no vertices are actually influenced by this joint yet. Now, the way that you do that is you have to edit the skin weights, and you have to bind the skin of this mesh to the skeleton. So we're going to go ahead and run that. And we're going to use a pretty simple operation. It's called direct distance, and this is very reminiscent of most DCC apps have this algorithm in it, and it's just going to try and find the nearest vertices based on the joints and weight them. So it's not going to do a great job, as you can tell by what I'm clicking around here in the viewport, but you know what? We're going to go ahead and accept that, and we're going to edit those. So once that is done, we can actually manipulate this, and wow, the mesh is actually moving and deforming, and it's crazy to see that inside of Unreal, that we can actually do that. It's pretty amazing. So let's go ahead and edit the weights. And I'm going to use the chest first. And now I hate using paintbrushes to edit weights in softwares. It just drives me nuts. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the vertices, and I'm just kind of line up and left click and drag to create a marquee. And then I'm going to grow that selection and keep growing. And the neat thing about this is you can see after a while, all these yellow highlights stop. And this grow will only run on enclosed meshes. So the bottom half being separated, this was by design for me because I like to make things easy on myself. So this is very easy for us now that there are 2 separate pieces. And what I can do is come down to the operations here. So under edit weights, we can actually flood, and I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do is replace all the skin weights with a positive value of 1. So flood will just literally flood the vertices with a positive value, so it will follow this joint. And now we're going to go and kind of do the same thing on the joint hinge. So let's select a decent amount of vertices by left click and dragging marquee, and then we're going to start growing this selection. And notice that I did select the skull, and all this other stuff is coming along for the ride as I hit grow. And if we spam it a couple more times, you can see that we have stopped, and I can go ahead and replace and flood with a positive value of 1 for the hinge, okay? So we'll accept. Now we can actually grab the hinge joint and it's aligned to the world, which is great. So our x-axis should pop that open. Okay, so you can see that we need to edit our handle on our weight. So let's go ahead and do that very fast. Okay, so this is very easy to fix. We'll just grab the joint chest, go into edit weights, and we'll just make sure that we marquee, select and drag, hold shift, left click marquee, select and drag, and then we'll just make sure that we flood after we grow the selection, and then we'll replace, we'll hit accept. Let's check our work and make sure this looks good. So, yep, looking good. Control Z to go back. Okay, awesome, looking good. So let's go ahead and save this. If you're enjoying this video and you want to learn Unreal Engine from the ground up, check out our self-paced course, Unreal Engine for 3D Artists, taught by Jonathan Winbush. In no time at all, you'll learn how to set up a project, bring in 3D models, light the scene, add textures, render, and so much more. Okay, let's get back to the tutorial. Awesome, so now that we have the weights set correctly on our treasure chest, we're going to right-click on the skeletal mesh, go to Create, and then we're going to go to Control Rig. And we're going to save, and we're going to pop this open, and we're greeted with the control rig logic, which is very much like blueprints. So we're going to use the forward solve for right now, and I'm going to right click on this root in the rig hierarchy. If you don't see that, go to Window, Rig Hierarchy, and right click on the root. We'll go to New, Control, we'll drag that out, and now we're going to manipulate the way that it looks. So we can scroll down on the right hand side, there's details, and I'm going to set this to yellow by setting that to 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and make this a circle thin, and I'm going to set the scale to 8. And then we can compile, and now we see a visual representation of the root control. So awesome. Let's go ahead and drag the root bone out, and we're going to set the bone. And I'm going to go ahead while we're at it, grab the joint hinge, drag that out, and set the bone as well. And now with the execution wire, we can fire the logic from setting the transformation of the root bone and setting the transformation of the joint bone. Now, what's going to drive these two? Well, you guessed it, it's our controls. So let's go ahead and finish up by going to New, Control. Let's put that underneath of the root control. And I'm going to rename this so the nomenclature follows to hinge control, and hit compile. And now we can drag out the root control and say get, and then I also need to get the hinge control. So now that we have those, we'll wire those up into the value for the transformation. So the transformation of the root control will affect the bone, the root bone, and the transformation of the hinge control will affect the hinge bone, okay? So let's make this look a little bit prettier by going down and changing this to a circle thin. And I'm gonna go ahead and rotate this on the y-axis and then scale it up to maybe, I don't know, 5. And then we'll move this up 10 in the Z so that we can actually see this. And we'll compile. And now that we have this looking pretty and everything's rigged up, we can open our chest. Now, this is great. We can actually animate this in the timeline. But I want to add just a few more things just to help you kind of build your foundation here. We're going to go to min. We're going to set that to 0. And we're going to go to max, and I'm going to set this to -120. So let's test this out by rotating on the x-axis. I can use the middle mouse button. And now you can see that we have limits, which is really awesome. So we can set the limits of the location as well by just setting everything to 0 on the min and max. And now when we try to move, we actually can't move the lid. So this is great to add in rig logic and controls for your animators so they can't break the rig. So now onto the fun stuff. We're going to go ahead and close this editor, and I'm going to delete the skeletal mesh chest control rig from the scene. And it's going to say, hey, you're going to break all the references in the sequencer. We'll go ahead and hit yes. And we'll make this clear that we are going to delete. Okay, so now let's go back and drag in our control rig asset. And once we do, you can see our controls actually appear in the editor. So I just want to line this up to 0, 0, 0. So I went over to my motion design outliner, and now I can use my animation outliner just to select the controls that are important to me. Okay, and we can even hide the lock for now. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and animate this chest opening for us. So let's say on the timeline after the lock flips out, I'm going to go ahead and turn on our auto key. Oh, which is, of course, is on right here by the key icon. So let's go ahead and go to our hinge control. And in our viewport, I'm going to give myself just a little bit more room. I'm going to go ahead and rotate that up and all the way to -120. Notice in the animation details here that it has done so. And that's the rules that we actually set. So, hey, it's working. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set a keyframe just by right-clicking on the keyframe. And I'm going to go back just a little bit. We can actually jump to the frames by using these handy-dandy keys down here. And that's at 219. So let's go to 200. And I can actually use the arrow keys on my keyboard to go back and forth on the frames. And then I'm going to set this to 0. And since we have our auto key turned on, we have linear keyframes that we can actually check out by going into the curve editor. Okay, so this is super handy. We can actually smooth those out by going into cubic interpolation, and you can do all the same fun stuff that you can in here. You can break the tangents and scale them out and do all kinds of great stuff. You can select the keys and use your middle mouse to go up and down, left and right. So definitely super nice and handy to have. And now you can see that our chest opens. And we did all this with some rig logic and just 2 simple bones in controls. Now you can see that this can get way more complicated, but I hope this helps just kind of lay the foundations of what you can do with control rig. And before I leave you, I'm going to show you something actually really cool, how we can bake this into a animation sequence that is basically an instant animation that we can use anywhere in our project. Now, the way that we have to do that is we have to add just a little bit more to our rig logic here. So now that we have the forward solve, we need the backward solve to bake that down. So let's go backward solve by right-clicking and typing backward solve. And we're going to do literally the inverse of what we've done up here. So instead of get control, I'm going to get the bone. So let's get the bone. And let's go ahead and get the other bone. And then I'm going to set the controls. So set the root, set the hinge. And it's literally just the inverse, the opposite. Okay. So let's think about this for a second. The backward solve is basically getting the bone position and setting the control positions so that we can bake the keyframes onto the controls. Okay, let's compile and let's save. And now once we have done that, we have our wonderful animation of this opening. We can actually right click, we'll go bake animation sequence, and I'll put that into the animation sequence folder, and I'll just call this chest open, and I'm just going to name this O2 because I already have one in there. And we'll go ahead and export. And now we can get rid of the keyframe track by deleting the control rig. And in the animation track, we can add our O2 animation. So now if we were to scrub, we can see that it opens. Word to the wise, don't overwrite the sequences from the bake panel. Make sure that you just notate it by _O2. Sometimes when that happens, it actually won't bake properly. So just something to watch out for you guys. But now, if you've ever used anything like mocap animation or you've brought in animation elsewhere, the FBX will basically have a animation sequence, and that's what we've created here. And we've done it all within the engine. So now if the client's like, oh man, that opens like way too late, like why did you leave so many frames in there? You could of course just slide this over, but if this was something more complex, you could do something really cool. We can add that control rig back in as a layer and make sure that you have this checked. It's very, very important. Then we'll go to our classes, and you can see the one that we actually created is here. And now that adds our control rig back. And what we can do is just manipulate the animation once more. So we will add in the X some more keyframes to close it. Okay, cool. So with the layered control rig, you can actually kind of non-destructively add animation on top of the sequence here. And then let's say we like that, we can right click, bake to animation sequence, and we can put this back into here, and we can say open and close. We'll say okay, export, And now we'll delete everything. And we deleted a little bit too much. I need an animation track, and now we need to go open and close. And look, we have the asset now. So it opens, and then it closes. And we can reuse this track anywhere in our project. And I hope you can see the endless possibilities here of being able to manipulate all of this in Editor. You don't have to go back to Blender. You don't have to go back to Cinema 4D. It's all inside of Unreal Engine in context. Thank you guys so much for following along. If you made it this far, leave us a like or a comment. I definitely read all the comments and try to answer as many questions as possible, so I'll be in the comment section. Thank you guys at School of Motion for allowing me to present on your channel. It's an honor. And if you guys have any ideas for future videos, let us know, because I'd love to come back. So I appreciate it, guys. We'll catch you in the next one. My name is Brandon Clements. Take care.